Blaine Hargreaves had imagined the sound of the place before he arrived. Wind in the tall grass, a screen door tapping gently, the kind of silence that settles into a house left alone long enough to forget voices. He parked on the gravel drive and cut the engine, letting the quiet press in. The countryside spread wide and green around the property, the mountains hazy in the distance, the afternoon lights soft and forgiving. He took a breath that tasted of pine and rain and reached for his leather bag, already planning the first night alone. The front gate stopped him. It was painted, not the weather-worn gray he remembered, but a careful, fresh white, the hinges oiled so it swung without complaint. Blaine stood there longer than he meant to, keys heavy in his palm, his mind sorting possibilities. A caretaker, maybe. A neighbor trying to be helpful. He stepped onto the path and noticed more signs. Flowers planted along the porch rail. Curtains in the windows. Pale and clean, moving slightly as if the house itself were breathing. Then he heard it. A baby's cry, sharp and unmistakably close. Blaine froze. The sound cut through him, instant and jarring, not something that belonged to an empty house in the hills. His first instinct was anger, hot and quick. His second was calculation. He checked the door. It was unlocked. Inside, the air smelled faintly of soap and something warm, like bread or milk. Shoes were lined neatly by the wall. A small jacket hung from a peg that Blaine knew had been bare for years. He took 2 steps in, his voice low and firm as he called out, demanding to know who was there. She appeared from the hallway, stopping short when she saw him. The woman was young, though exhaustion made her hard to place. Her hair was pulled back hastily, loose strands escaping around a face gone pale with shock. In her arms she held a baby, pressed close to her chest, the child's cry softening into a confused whimper as she rocked him without thinking. Behind her, half hidden by the doorframe, a little girl clutched a doll with one missing eye and watched Blaine with solemn, frightened focus. For a long second, none of them spoke. Blaine's grip tightened on his bag. His voice came out sharper than he intended as he asked who she was and why she was in his house. The woman swallowed. "My name is Elowen Cross," she said, her words careful, measured. "I was told I could stay here. Temporarily." Blaine let out a short, humorless breath. He told her she had been misinformed. He told her this was private property and that she needed to gather her things and leave. As he spoke, he noticed details he could not unsee. The baby's flushed cheeks, the way the little girl pressed closer to the wall, as if trying to make herself smaller. The house itself looked changed, lived in gently rather than invaded. The floors were clean. A folded blanket rested on the sofa he had covered before leaving years ago. Elowen's eyes flicked to the door, then back to him. She said a name, a man Blaine recognized immediately, a former caretaker he had dismissed long ago for being careless with money and truth. She explained, haltingly, that the man had claimed partial ownership, had shown her papers, had promised the house would be safe until she could find something else. Blaine knew at once she had been lied to. That knowledge did not soften his anger. It complicated it. He told her he would call the police. The baby began to cry again, louder this time, his small body stiffening in her arms. Elowen closed her eyes briefly, took a breath that trembled, and then everything seemed to spill out of her at once. Her husband had died in a factory accident weeks earlier. There had been hospital bills, then the funeral, then the landlord who wanted the apartment back. She had no family nearby, no savings left. The man who promised her this place had vanished the morning after she arrived. She did not cry theatrically. Her voice broke once and then steadied, as if she had learned not to rely on sympathy. The little girl behind her shifted, the doll slipping from her fingers to the floor. Elowen did not notice. Her focus stayed on Blaine, on his face, on whatever judgment he would pass. Blaine felt something tighten in his chest that had nothing to do with the long drive. He looked at the children again. The baby had gone quiet, his small fist tangled in the fabric of his mother's dress. The girl met Blaine's eyes directly now, defiant and afraid in equal measure. He thought of his own daughter, older than this girl by many years, and the way she had learned to watch him the same way, measuring his moods, bracing for disappointment. He pushed the memory aside, annoyed by its timing. "This can't continue," he said more quietly. "I need to think." Elowen nodded immediately, relief and dread crossing her face in quick succession. She said she would do whatever he asked. She said they did not need much time. Blaine walked through the house, needing space, needing to see for himself. The kitchen table held a child's drawing, folded carefully to the side. The sink was empty. A pot cooled on the stove. Nothing was damaged. Nothing was stolen. It was as if the house had been waiting for people and had accepted them gratefully. When he returned to the entryway, Elowen stood exactly where he had left her. The baby had fallen asleep against her shoulder. The little girl had retrieved her doll and now held it tighter, as if preparing for impact. Blaine told them they could stay for now. The words surprised him as much as they did Elowen. He added conditions quickly, setting boundaries, framing it as temporary, controlled. He told himself it was practical. He needed time to contact his lawyer, time to unwind the mess the caretaker had created, time to decide the cleanest way to end this. Elowen nodded through all of it, gratitude written plainly on her face. She thanked him once, quietly, and led the children back down the hall. That evening, Blaine unpacked in the guest room he had never intended to use. As he lay awake, he listened to unfamiliar sounds. A child's soft footsteps. A lullaby hummed under a closed door. The house did not settle the way it used to. It felt alert, occupied, awake. He stared at the ceiling and told himself this was a mistake he would correct in the morning. Yet when he finally drifted into sleep, it was not the silence he remembered that followed him, but the steady, living rhythm of a house that, for the first time in years, was no longer empty. Morning came quietly, as if the house itself were unsure whether it was allowed to wake. Blaine stirred before the sun had fully cleared the hills, disoriented by the unfamiliar weight of other lives moving beyond his door. For a moment he lay still, listening. A floorboard creaked somewhere down the hall. A kettle clicked on in the kitchen. The soft murmur of a woman's voice drifted through the walls, low and soothing, followed by the faint sound of a child answering her. He sat up, rubbed his face, and reminded himself why they were here. Temporary, he thought. Necessary. Complicated. He dressed carefully, habit guiding his hands, and stepped out into the hallway. The kitchen was already warm. Elowen stood at the counter with Rowan propped against her shoulder, his eyes half closed as she rocked him gently. Maribel sat at the table, legs swinging, carefully coloring inside the lines of a picture Blaine did not recognize. The smell of toast and something sweet filled the room. Honey, maybe. Or apples. Elowen turned when she heard him. Her posture straightened instinctively, as if bracing for instruction. "Good morning," she said, her voice quiet but steady. Blaine nodded. He hesitated, then said it back. The word felt strange in his mouth, like a courtesy he had not practiced in years. He poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter, watching without meaning to. Elowen moved with an economy that suggested practice rather than ease, each gesture deliberate, careful not to take up more space than necessary. When Rowan fussed, she soothed him without breaking stride. When Maribel reached for more crayons, Elowen slid the box closer without looking. They ate together in an awkward, tentative silence. Maribel watched Blaine from beneath her lashes, curiosity beginning to edge out fear. When he asked if she liked to draw, she nodded solemnly and pushed the paper toward him, proud of her work. Blaine studied the picture longer than it warranted. A simple house with too many windows and a sun drawn impossibly large above it. "That's a lot of light," he said. Maribel smiled, just a little. After breakfast, Blaine retreated to the porch under the pretense of checking his phone. In truth, he needed air. The ease with which the morning had unfolded unsettled him. He told himself it meant nothing. People adapted. Houses filled themselves if you let them. It did not mean they should stay. Elowen joined him a few minutes later, settling into a chair across from him with Rowan asleep against her chest. She thanked him again, more quietly this time, as if the words were fragile. Blaine waved it off, already uncomfortable with gratitude. He asked practical questions instead. How long she had known the caretaker, whether she had any paperwork, where she planned to go next. Elowen answered honestly. She had believed what she was told because she needed to. She had not planned beyond the next day because grief had narrowed her world to survival. As she spoke, Blaine noticed the way she never complained outright. She stated facts, accepted them, moved on. There was no self-pity in her tone, only fatigue and a stubborn resolve to keep going. Later that morning, Blaine took a call he had been avoiding. The name on the screen tightened his jaw before he even answered. His former in-laws spoke politely, their concern carefully measured. They asked how he was settling in. They mentioned his daughter, how she was doing well in school, how she asked about him sometimes but not often. The distance between them pressed in, heavy and familiar. When the call ended, Blaine remained on the porch, staring out at the fields. He did not notice Elowen watching from the doorway until she cleared her throat softly. She did not ask questions. She simply nodded, as if acknowledging a weight she recognized. The day unfolded in small, unexpected moments. Blaine found Maribel in the garden, carefully watering flowers he had not planted. He showed her how to hold the hose, so it did not spray back into her face. She laughed, startled and bright, and the sound caught him off guard. Inside, Elowen folded laundry with quiet efficiency, humming under her breath. The house absorbed these sounds greedily, as if it had been waiting for them. In the afternoon, a car pulled into the drive. Blaine tensed instinctively, irritation flaring at the intrusion. A neighbor stepped out, older, cheerful, waving as if this were the most natural thing in the world. He greeted Blaine warmly, then glanced past him into the house. "Didn't know you had company," the man said, smiling. "Your family's settling in all right?" The word lingered between them. "Family." Blaine opened his mouth to correct him, then closed it again. He did not know why. Elowen appeared behind him, confusion flickering across her face before she lowered her gaze. Blaine nodded noncommittally, ushered the neighbor away with a few polite words, and shut the door with more force than necessary. The silence afterward felt heavier. That evening, Blaine's phone rang again. This time it was his lawyer. The conversation was brief but pointed. The caretaker had left more damage behind than Blaine realized. Allowing Elowen to remain could complicate matters. Boundaries needed to be clear. Decisions needed to be made quickly. Blaine ended the call and stood alone in the living room, the glow of the lamps softening the edges of furniture he had once covered and forgotten. From the hallway came the sound of Elowen reading to Maribel, her voice steady, comforting. Rowan gurgled in response, blissfully unaware of anything beyond the warmth that surrounded him. Blaine told himself he was tired. That fatigue was blurring his judgment. He went to bed early, but sleep did not come easily. He lay awake, staring into the dark, replaying the day in fragments. The way Maribel's laughter had filled the garden. The way Elowen had met his questions without defensiveness. The way the house no longer echoed. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened and closed softly. Footsteps padded past his room, then retreated. Blaine turned onto his side and exhaled slowly, aware of a feeling he had not allowed himself in years. Dread, yes, but also something else. A fragile, unwelcome sense of anticipation. The change came subtly at first, like a shift in pressure that only made itself known after it had already happened. Blaine noticed it in the way Elowen began to move more quietly through the house, as if she were trying not to leave a trace. She folded laundry later than usual, waited until he had finished his coffee before entering the kitchen, kept her conversations with Maribel hushed and brief. The ease of the previous days thinned, replaced by a careful distance that made the rooms feel larger again. Blaine told himself it was for the best. He had spoken to his lawyer. He knew the risks. Allowing things to feel normal was dangerous, misleading. Still, when he found the garden half-tended and the hose coiled neatly instead of left out for Maribel to trip over, a small, unreasonable irritation settled in his chest. The sky darkened by mid-afternoon. Clouds rolled in from the mountains, low and heavy, pressing down on the land. The air turned sharp, charged, as if the world were holding its breath. Blaine stood at the window longer than necessary, watching the first drops of rain strike the glass. He thought of the roads, narrow and winding, and the way storms could turn them treacherous in minutes. Elowen noticed the weather too. She closed windows, secured the porch chairs, checked the baby monitor twice. Rowan had been restless all day, his cries sharper, his skin warmer than it should have been. Elowen had tried to dismiss it as teething, as fatigue, as anything that did not carry the weight of fear. But as the rain intensified and thunder cracked overhead, her worry hardened into something colder. By the time the power went out, Rowan's fever had climbed. The lights flickered once, twice, and then the house dropped into darkness, broken only by the pale gray light filtering through the storm. Maribel whimpered and pressed herself against Elowen's side. The wind howled around the corners of the house, rattling the windows with sudden force. Blaine moved without thinking. He found flashlights, set them on the table, checked the breaker, even though he knew it would do no good. When he returned to the living room, Elowen sat rigid on the couch, Rowan limp in her arms, her face drained of color. "He's too hot," she said. Her voice barely carried over the rain. "Something's wrong." Blaine knelt in front of her, resting his hand gently against Rowan's forehead. The heat startled him. The baby's breathing was shallow, uneven. Blaine felt a flicker of alarm sharpen into focus. He asked when it had started, what Elowen had tried, whether Rowan had eaten. His tone was calm, deliberate, the way it used to be when decisions mattered. Elowen answered automatically, her eyes never leaving Rowan's face. As Blaine spoke, he was aware of how easily the role settled over him, how instinctive it felt to take control. He directed her to fetch cool cloths, to keep Rowan upright, to slow her own breathing. The storm raged outside, rain pounding the roof with relentless force. Somewhere in the distance, a tree cracked and fell. Rowan's breathing hitched suddenly, then stilled. For one unbearable second, the world narrowed to that silence. Elowen made a sound that was more breath than voice, a broken plea that seemed to tear free of her chest. Blaine did not hesitate. He took Rowan from her arms, cradling the small body with steady hands. He spoke softly, urgently, rubbing Rowan's back, coaxing, grounding himself in the rhythm of action. After a moment that felt far too long, Rowan gasped, then cried, weak but alive. Elowen collapsed forward, covering her face, her shoulders shaking. When she spoke, her words came out tangled and raw. She said she was cursed, that everyone she loved left or died, that she could not survive losing another person, especially not her child. Blaine held Rowan closer, feeling the rise and fall of his chest, anchoring himself in that fragile motion. He listened without interrupting, without offering empty reassurance. When Elowen finally looked up, her eyes red and desperate, he met her gaze steadily. "You're not alone," he said. The words surprised him with their certainty. "Not tonight." The storm stretched on, relentless. Roads flooded. Cell service flickered and died. Blaine monitored Rowan through the night, keeping him cool, alert for any change. Elowen stayed close, her fears slowly giving way to exhaustion. At some point, she leaned against Blaine's shoulder without realizing it. He did not move away. Maribel slept curled up on the far end of a couch, clutching her doll. Blaine watched her breathing, counted it the way he had once counted another child's breaths years ago, back when his life had held different responsibilities. The memory did not hurt as sharply as he expected. It felt distant, but not unreachable. Sometime before dawn, the storm eased. The rain softened into a steady whisper. Rowan's fever broke gradually, leaving him weak but stable. Elowen noticed first, her relief spilling out in a quiet sob. Blaine nodded, cautious but hopeful. He did not release Rowan until the sky lightened and birds began to stir outside. Morning revealed the damage. Fallen branches littered the drive. The road beyond the property had collapsed in places, washed out by the night's rain. Blaine surveyed it grimly, then returned inside. Elowen stood in the kitchen, rocking Rowan gently, her movements slower, heavier. "I should go," she said suddenly, without looking at him. "As soon as the road clears. I should have gone sooner." Blaine felt the words like a weight settling against his ribs. He wanted to argue, to insist she rest, but something in her tone stopped him. This was not a request. It was a defense, a way to protect herself from attachment. He did not respond right away. Instead, he watched the house around them. The chairs pulled close, the blankets draped where Maribel had slept. The marks of a night survived together. Outside, the storm had passed. Inside, Blaine understood, with a clarity that left no room for denial, that nothing was the same as it had been the day before. Blaine did not make the call immediately. He stood at the kitchen window long after Elowen had turned away, watching the broken road below the hill and the mist lifting slowly from the fields. The house smelled of damp earth and warm milk. Rowan slept against Elowen's shoulder, his small chest rising and falling with a steadiness that still felt miraculous. Maribel sat at the table, tracing circles on the wood with her finger, quieter than usual, as if she sensed the moment balanced on something fragile. When Blaine finally reached for his phone, his hand did not shake. The signal was weak but present. His lawyer answered with a clipped efficiency that belonged to a different life. Blaine listened, then interrupted gently. He said he understood the risks. He said he was prepared to accept them. He said the caretaker's mess would be handled, but not at the cost of throwing a family back into uncertainty. There was a pause on the other end, surprise giving way to caution. Blaine repeated himself, slower this time, as if setting something in stone. When he ended the call, the quiet that followed felt earned. Elowen watched him from the doorway, questions flickering across her face. Blaine crossed the room and stopped a careful distance away. He did not reach for her. He spoke plainly, without promise or flourish. He said she did not need to leave. Not today. Not because of fear. He said he would take responsibility for the situation he had inherited, and that he wanted clarity rather than haste. Elowen lowered herself into a chair, relief and disbelief tangling together. She pressed her fingers to her eyes, then looked up at him again, searching for conditions, for the edge beneath the kindness. Blaine met her gaze and held it. He told her this was not charity. He told her he had learned, painfully, what happened when he treated people like problems to be managed. He said the house had changed because it was meant to be lived in, not preserved. Maribel slipped down from her chair and patted over, stopping between them. She looked up at Blaine, then at her mother. "Are we staying?" she asked, as if the answer might shatter if spoken too loudly. "For now," Blaine said and meant it. Maribel nodded, satisfied, and returned to her drawing as if the matter were settled. The days that followed unfolded with a steadiness that felt new to all of them. Repairs began quietly. Fallen branches were cleared. Calls were made. Paperwork moved forward in patient steps. Blaine found himself adjusting his schedule without resentment, shaping his time around meals and naps and the soft rhythms of children learning where they belonged. Elowen contributed without overstepping, restoring rooms with a gentleness that respected what had been there before. One afternoon, as Blaine returned from town, he found the front gate open and Elowen standing at it, a small suitcase at her feet. His chest tightened before his mind caught up. He stepped out of the car and walked toward her, the gravel crunching under his shoes. "I was going to take Maribel to the library," she said quickly, misunderstanding the look on his face. "She wants to read something new." Blaine exhaled, a quiet laugh escaping him. He shook his head once, then stopped in front of her. The moment stretched, filled with all the things they had not said yet. Blaine chose his words carefully, aware of how easily fear could dress itself up as caution. "This house," he said, "was empty long before you arrived. I told myself it was by choice. I was wrong." He looked past her, at the road that had almost taken her away, then back to her eyes. "I'm not asking you to stay because you need it. I'm asking because I do." Elowen's breath caught. She studied his face, weighing sincerity against the cost of believing. When she spoke, her voice was steady. She said she would stay if it was a decision they made together, not a rescue, not a temporary shelter with an expiration date attached. Blaine nodded. That was exactly what he wanted. Months passed, marked by small milestones that would have meant nothing to Blaine before and everything now. The legal knots were untangled. The house was placed into a family trust, its future defined by intention rather than neglect. Blaine's daughter visited one weekend, cautious at first, then curious, then quietly delighted by Maribel's eagerness and Rowan's laughter. The past did not vanish, but it loosened its grip. On a late afternoon warmed by sun, Blaine stood on the porch and watched Elowen in the yard with the children. Maribel chased Bubbles across the grass. Rowan took uncertain steps, arms outstretched, Elowen close enough to catch him if he fell. The house behind Blaine hummed with a life he had once believed was no longer meant for him. Elowen looked up and met his eyes. There was no fear in her expression now. Only presence. Only home. Blaine understood then that nothing had been taken from him. Everything had been returned.